What is up, guys? Welcome to my review for Arrow Season 7, Episode 21, titled Living Proof. Before I get into the actual review for this episode, I want to talk about the reference in this episode, a reference that completely took me off guard, a reference to the Justice League. For the first time ever, somebody in the Arrowverse said the words Justice and League back to back, and that is Elena, the friend of Felicity who helps her out sometimes with hacking. I gotta say, this for the first time them ever mentioning the Justice League, or for the first time they ever name drop or say the words Justice League, this was incredibly underwhelming because not only were they not talking about the Justice League, they were talking about Team Arrow being a Justice League, and also Elena is not exactly a character that I would expect to be the first character in a DC universe to say the Justice League. Like Superman, Batman, The Flash, these characters would be good to see them come up with the name Justice League, but for it to be Elena, a character who I don't think exists in the comics and a character who's barely significant on the show as well, that is incredibly underwhelming, and for some reason this reference, I didn't like it. So getting past that reference, let's talk about the actual episode. So the last episode ended with Emiko just dropping an entire building on Team Arrow. We saw Oliver being buried between two huge slabs of concrete, as well as the rest of Team Arrow also being in that building. After that, we see that none of the members of Team Arrow are injured at all. I mean, not only are they all alive, which is insane, but none of them are have any broken bones. None of them are injured in the slightest, which, I mean, it's hard to suspend your disbelief at that point. I mean, they all should have died here. They all should have died in the Lianu explosion. A lot of them should have died in a lot of times, but this, just like the Lianu explosion, it's really, really hard to suspend my disbelief at the fact that not only did none of them die, none of them are injured either, or at least visibly injured from what we were told on the show. But aside from that, I did really like how they went about this whole storyline in the episode, where you have, obviously, Oliver is stuck between these two slabs of concrete, but then he wakes up immediately and is confronted by a very bearded Tommy Merlin. I mentioned this in my trailer breakdown, but it makes absolutely no sense that Tommy has a beard, and they reference the fact that he has a beard. They mentioned how he shouldn't have a beard, but he does. That still doesn't explain the fact that he does, and that kind of bothered me for a second, but I completely forgot about it for the rest of this episode. I think this storyline with Oliver and Tommy, with Oliver being stuck under these slabs of concrete and him getting out supposedly with the help of this figment of his imagination, which, again, didn't make any sense, but I'm glad that they resolved that at the end with the twist that everything that we saw in Oliver's perspective, it didn't happen, and it was kind of all a dream. But I think it really worked for this episode. I'll talk about that twist later in this review. All of the scenes between Oliver and Tommy were great. Some of them were very emotional as well. I think Tommy brings some sort of emotional weight to this show that I feel like the show might have been lacking for a while, but now that he is back, I think it really works for the emotion of it all. Tommy's death in Season 1's finale was in my opinion, the saddest death in the Arrowverse ever, partially because of the great acting in the scene, partially because of the fact that this season built up their friendship and subsequent drifting apart from each other near the end of the season so incredibly well. Part of that was the music as well, and this episode kind of made me feel very similar. They purposely made everything seem the exact same way it was in the season finale of Arrow, and they even mentioned the fact that this scenario that Oliver is in is incredibly similar to the whole sequence of events that killed Tommy in the Season 1 finale, and all of that led to a pretty emotional moment at the end, right after Oliver killed Emiko in the twist dream world that he was in, and then he woke up. There's a lot of great emotion there after that with the confrontation between him and Tommy because of everything we knew about Tommy in the past, and the music in the background especially. It was incredibly emotional, and that was easily my favorite part of this episode. It saved this episode from being maybe not great from a lot of different standpoints, a lot of things in this episode that I didn't really like, but because of this whole twist, and because of all the confrontations between Oliver and Tommy, and because of especially the emotional scene at the end, this episode basically succeeded in everything it was trying to do with Oliver and Tommy. It kind of manipulated you into being emotional, and I think it worked for this episode, even though it was kind of manipulative in that sense. I don't really mind it for this episode at all, which is why this episode is probably my favorite episode of the season since the prison storyline ended, which is great because I said the exact same thing for the last episode. It feels like this season might be wrapping up to a good conclusion, although it started good, it might end good, everything in the middle was really bad. Getting past everything to do with Oliver and Tommy, there is obviously Team Arrow trying to get through the exact same scenario that Oliver would be in, or he was in the dream world that he was in after he got out of that slab of concrete. But here they're trying to escape this building, trying to help Oliver as well. And I did like this, all these scenes. I liked specifically the dynamic and the conversations between Roy and Dinah. I really like their kind of dynamic in the comics. Like, this is Black Canary and Arsenal, something we haven't seen in a very long time. And I don't think season 3 really did a good job at establishing some sort of friendship or relationship between the two, and this episode I think did that, and did it in a very good way. And I do however think that Roy saying that he should turn himself in and Black Canary saying that he should, and that whole thing, I think it would have worked a lot better if Roy was a member of this team for a while, because again, like I said in the last episode, it feels like he literally just returned to be a plot device into a liability for Team Arrow, which I do think worked for the most part, but at the same time it could have been a lot better. That being said, all these scenes with Team Arrow going through the building, I do think they were pretty good. There was one scene when Roy was going through this gaseous place, or a very flammable place that would be very dangerous and was very dangerous. There was no tension there because we already know Roy would be alive in the future, and when the flash forwards take away tension from the present day, you know there is a problem there, and it's not really a problem for the present day to take place to take tension away from the flashbacks, because the flashbacks are not the main thing. But here there would have been tension if Roy was not knowingly alive in the future. Like, I think Diggle, when he was shot by an arrow, that was intense. There was actual tension there because I didn't know if Diggle was alive there. I didn't know if he was gonna die there, because we don't know if he's alive in the future, and I do think that really worked for the episode, while the whole thing with Roy, it really didn't. It seemed like the rest of Team Arrow were so nervous, while me, the viewer, I was not. The two storylines in the collapsed building between Green Arrow and Team Arrow, they collide, and they both go up against the Ninth Circle, and obviously Amiko Queen, or Red Arrow. This was all a part of a dream that Green Arrow was dreaming, but there were some pretty good fight scenes, and again, I think the moment where Oliver shot Amiko, that was a pretty insane scene. I did not see that coming. I genuinely thought that Amiko was going to die in that moment, and this whole threat of the Ninth Circle was actually over, because the finale might focus entirely on the Monitor and everything to do with Crisis on Infinite Earths, or at least I thought it would. So in that moment, I genuinely thought that Amiko could be dead, and then when Oliver turned around to see Diggle and he had an arrow in his heart, I genuinely thought that he would be dead as well, and maybe off screen while Oliver was shooting Amiko, somebody shot him, or Amiko shot Diggle so fast that Oliver just didn't notice, or we didn't notice. But when he was shot, I genuinely thought that he would be dead right here, because we have no idea if he is alive in the future. But then obviously I saw Roy and Renee and Dinah, who are all confirmed to be alive in the future, which is why I thought that they made a great decision by using Diggle here as the first person you see, because anybody else, it would not have been intense, because we knew they are alive in the future. Before Diggle, it starts ramping up because you don't know if he's going to be dead or not, same with Amiko, and then it shows the rest of Team Arrow, and you start to think that this is probably not real, and then it cuts to the twist, and Oliver wakes up, which I think was a great job, a great way to do all of this. And I think this twist, as well as the emotional scene right after the twist, right before he wakes up, it saved the episode from being maybe okay to being really, really good. Then Team Arrow goes up against the Ninth Circle for real this time, in a pretty great climactic ending to this episode. I really liked this. The fight scenes were great. The conversation between Oliver and Amiko, where Amiko tells him to kill her and he refuses. It was a great, intense, climactic ending to this episode, and that leads into the season finale fairly well. That being said, this episode, although I really liked it, had two things about it that I did not, and they both involve both Felicity and Elena being a part of them. I really don't want to talk about these two things too much, because I came out of this episode really liking it. A lot of great emotional moments, great acting, great action, and great character and storyline development for the season and the cast, and I really liked it. But there were some things in this episode that really bugged me. For one, Felicity was especially annoying in this episode. Her whining, which was not misplaced, because her whining and her worrying about Oliver, I mean, it makes sense that it happened, but I think Emily Bell Rickards is such a terrible actress in those specific scenes in that type of acting that it came off as just annoying whining, and it came off as misplaced, even though it technically wasn't. But I think this whole thing of going off the grid because the police are after her, and the fact that she attacked the police in a very manufactured scene, it all is a very manufactured storyline to get her off the show. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad she's leaving, but the way they're going about it is just so manufactured. In terms of the flash forwards, well, you probably know my opinion about these things. They're stupid, they kind of ruin the show, and they're going to make the show look probably pretty bad in the end. I don't know how it's going to end, but I have no idea how they're going to make this look good for the show and for especially the character of Oliver Queen. But I think the flash forwards are bad. They're always bad. This episode was not any worse than usual, but it's also not any better than usual. A lot of stupid things happen in the flash forwards, and the pointlessness of it all, and the fact that it takes away from the tension of the present day. I hate it, it's terrible, and let's move on to the conclusion of this review. In conclusion, I think it is pretty easy to ignore all the stupid shit in this episode, like the flash forwards, like the extremely manufactured Felicity Elena storyline, as well as the lack of tension in certain scenes like with Arsenal, because we know he's not going to die, as well as the Justice League mention, which felt so underwhelming, but the rest of it was great. A lot of great emotional moments, a lot of great acting, a lot of great action and fight scenes, a great twist that made the episode so much better, a lot of great intense, tense moments, as well as a very climactic and great ending to the episode, along with great storyline development, great character development. I genuinely love this episode and would give it a 10 out of 10 if there wasn't all that stupid stuff, but I will give it a 9.7 out of 10 instead. But let me know what you thought about the episode in the comments down below, and if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe. And as always, thanks.